How's it going, guys? Thanks for clicking on to the Phil Talk Sports Podcast. Myself and Nick Rice here to talk all things college football, NFL football, and maybe the other kind of football at the very end if there's time. Nick, how's it going, man? How was your weekend?
Going pretty great. Not as eventful as last weekend, which we'll get into, but pretty eventful nonetheless.
Plenty of fun things to check out over the weekend, both in NCAA football and the pros. And obviously I had to wait all the way till Monday to watch the Eagles play, which is why we're doing this today instead of yesterday. So it's always cool when your team's on Monday night, but it also is annoying that you got to wait longer than everybody. And it's also nice when your team plays Thursday, because then you can just veg out on Sunday and you don't got to worry about your team. You can just watch everything else. That's how I view that.
Same here. And it's every year, it seems like the NFL and college, like everything's constantly changing. So, for the longest, Monday Night Football, the opening weekend was a doubleheader, but now you had the doubleheader here and they're having the games overlap, which is fascinating. I love it. But you never know what to expect. And this was one of those instances too.
Yeah, it being on week 2, I thought was weird. We talked about how we didn't know why that was the case, but I kind of liked it when you'd have the normal game and then a West Coast game. It'd usually be a Charger or a Raider game start right after it. So the overlapping, like I was going to watch the Eagles either way, so I didn't do a lot of channel jumping. That and the fact that the Bills just kind of flattened the Titans, there was no real reason to turn over to that game. But I think I prefer the other way, but it can just confuse me that that was on week 2 instead of week 1. Usually the doubleheaders, on week 1.
Yeah. Who knows anymore? Now we got Christmas NFL, so that's going to be something to look forward to. Just craziness going on.
So let's jump into college football before we continue the NFL talk. You mentioned last weekend was a little more eventful for you. That's because you took a trip to Snapdragon Stadium, still one of the best named stadiums that I know of in the country, to see San Diego State play. I'm going to just give you the floor. How was that experience in this brand new stadium?
Well, it's the best name in Southern California, no question. I mean, now that Staples is the crypt, it's just, this is the place to go to,
Is that what people call
Snapdragon?
Is it the crypt now? Is that a thing?
I guess it's the crypt. That's what I'm calling it. And that's all that matters.
That's probably better, honestly. Yeah, roll with that.
Yeah. So Snapdragon's about 35,000 seat capacity. I went against little FCS Idaho State. So not necessarily the draw that, Mountain West games will have, but it still was an intriguing stadium. The backdrop of the rolling hills right next to the ocean is pretty awesome, not going to lie. I think they did a pretty good job with it. It's a lot like SoFi Stadium, where the stadium is actually a little bit beneath ground level. They tried to do that for planes to go over SoFi, and I would assume it's the same with the airport not too far away. But overall, I got to admit, we are a show of honesty here. We don't sugarcoat it. We give it to you as it is. Those attendance numbers that San Diego State had in their opener against Arizona and against Idaho State, there were people clamoring that it might be a little inflated. And
I mean, that's always the case. That's every sports and entertainment venue. Because, I don't know if you know this, they get to count the staff that's working in the stadium.
Really?
So those numbers are artificially inflated, but also telling the truth, because they're saying, hey, we had this many people on the grounds during the game. So they coaching staff count, players count, the people working concession stands count. So I'm sure it's still a little more inflated than that, but that helps your numbers get closer to what they are.
I was going to say, I wouldn't be surprised if they counted the literal players as attendance. And right. I guess, nothing ceases to amaze me anymore. But point is, there were lax, casual fans that showed up to that game. When the defense was facing a third down, I mean, you couldn't tell if it was just like a regular play. It was insane to me. Aztecs did not run away with the game, and that's kind of concerning for the program. This might be a pretty rough year for them. They just got blown out against Utah. Mm-hmm. So while the program might not be as good, I'm sure part of it is I'm sure we're going home feeling like, oh, we're going to get a big advantage here that we didn't get at Carson, when in reality, the fans that showed up to there would show up here, but there's not many more fans that are going to show up no matter where you play. And that's Southern California for you.
So is this stadium on campus? Is it near campus? What's that situation?
Near campus. It's
Okay.
probably about a 5-minute drive, 10 with traffic. So it's not the most ideal. I'm trying to think of a like USC would be similar, where the Coliseum's about 10 minutes away. So it's still a little unusual, but it's close enough for a home game for sure.
So you say a 5-minute drive. So in California, that equates to what, like a 2.5 hour drive, something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And then don't forget about parking, which I was amazed. The whole parking lot is just dirt fields. It's like,
Really?
what?
I didn't
Yeah,
think I didn't think California had any dirt left, so that is surprising.
that sure is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't get it. And it's just a nightmare getting in there. But it still is an awesome stadium and a great experience. A little dull in terms of the amenities. It's just a standard stadium, but I'm sure with how expensive it is to build stuff here in Southern California, I'm sure they took that into consideration. Do we want more seats or do we want crazy amenities?
Yeah.
And they chose the seats. One other random side note, the press and the broadcasters and all of the people who work the game are working in the end zone. So where the end zone is, right on that corner back pylon, that's where all the press is angled. But all the suite holders, those are the guys who get the real view, and they're sitting between the 20s.
And I assume there's a press box in the normal location, right?
No, all that's
Oh,
still
it's
in
all
the
in the
end zone.
corner. Wow,
Everybody who works the game is working in that end zone.
that is
So
head
very, very
scratching
weird.
for sure.
Yeah.
So you went to the second game, and hindsight being what it is, that's probably for the best, because I saw the article for the opening game and the nightmare that it was, the lack of water, the lack of shade, people
Yep.
passing out, because of the heat. So it sounds like you didn't see any of that. You told me, so they must have straightened some things out for the second game, I would think.
Not, well, I mean, well, to be fair, it was just overcast and 80, so it was
No, that's
much,
good.
much more versus 105 over there. So it was much more durable, much more doable over there. But still, really a great, great venue. The team should be good in the near future with Brady Hoke if he sticks around. But yeah, just a little disappointing. There wasn't as much fan interaction and not as much energy in the stadium as I anticipated. But still, a pretty good experience.
The way you describe the stadium, though, it does remind me a lot of like when UCF built theirs in '07. It's when it was first built, it was a pretty generic stadium. There wasn't anything that, you put seat on TV, what it is, other than the fact that it bounced when people jumped up and down, but you didn't know that until after the game had started. And it was a pretty basic stadium, but the thing is, you built it then, the cost it would take to build that now would be probably triple the price. So they built it at a good time, and they've since added things that make it recognizable. And I'm sure that's something they'll eventually do. They'll add some sort of Aztec, maybe statue, if that's not already there. They'll do something that eventually you'll be like, oh yeah, that's Snapdragon. I'm about to watch San Diego State. So I think the fact that it's an interesting kind of strategy that some of these places have to do. But I think you get the stadium built, because on campus stadiums are more important now than they've ever been. I mean, you look at Miami, that are supposed to be great this year. Their own quarterback just came out and said, yeah, I like playing away games better, because the home games, there's no atmosphere, because they're playing in Hard Rock, the Miami Dolphins Stadium. And no matter how many Hurricane fans show up, it's not going to be a sellout. So the atmosphere is only what it is. And you mentioned the atmosphere is a little to be desired, but that has to do with performance. I think if you got a good team, the people will follow. So I think it's a great foundation for a program that's on the up. Might not be, it's not a finished product net right now, but I from what I saw on TV, it does seem like a really cool atmosphere that can be built on over time.
Yeah, actually, that is a great point. Miami is another prime example of, an NFL stadium, an NFL type of feel, and you can only do so much creating an atmosphere for those home games.
Mm-hmm.
And I would assume USC is the same. I've never been there for a USC game, but yeah, going to Miami, going to San Diego State now, and having those games off of campus, there was something missing, unfortunately. So maybe San Diego State could figure something out, but between now and then, there's always going to be a little something missing.
You've never been to a USC game at home, like in the Coliseum?
No, but I went to a
Really?
Rams game.
Okay, I
In
mean
the
that makes sense.
So I feel like I got most of the experience, but yeah, never did.
Interesting. You know who really needs help in the attendance department, and everything else? I don't know if you've seen these screenshots of USC games. There are 5s and 10s of people at this game, man, and it's
Oh
like,
yeah, it's
man,
bad.
is that embarrassing.
Mm-hmm.
Like you
Yeah,
said,
and
there was a
that's the
wide shot
thing
of them
here.
kicking the extra point, and I didn't see a single fan, not a
It's like, oh,
single fan in like that third of the stadium. It was crazy.
yeah, do they have COVID restrictions? And then when you realize they don't, then all of a sudden the fans say, well, it's hot. And it's like, really? It's only hot here? It's not hot anywhere else? So, yeah, just hilarious.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
So, I mean, I'm good to see you had a good time. I don't know if you're going to go back this season, but at least you know it's something that maybe it's like a once a year checkup thing. Like, all right, what has changed? What has made it better? I've not made it to a UCF game this year yet. I'm going October 1st when we play SMU and actually talk about amenities. I'm going to sit in the cabana seats for the first time. So if you
Yep.
watch a
That's
UCF
awesome.
game on TV, it's that beach themed area kind of at the 50-yard line. There's a bar in there. So you don't got to wait in line forever. It's a shorter line. Bathrooms are closer. Everything's a bit nicer. So I'm going there for the first time. So I'm very much looking forward to that. So I'm glad you had a good time at your game, and I'm chomping at the bit to go to mine.
Oh man, are you kidding me? Like the rest of the world has to deal with lines, unlike Phil Nunziata. I hope you have a great time. Make sure to send pictures and tell us
Definitely.
all about it.
And I'm going at the end of the year. We played Navy. I'm probably going to be back in my season ticket seat. I'll be back with I didn't plan to talk about this today, but you've been to plenty of games, and I'm sure you've been from regular seats to fancier things. Maybe at Staples, the Crypt as you called it.
Yep.
There is a point where like I know it sounds cool to like go sit in a skybox, but why drive all the way to a stadium if you're going to be in that situation? Like there is a line that I won't cross because I want the game atmosphere. You know what I mean? Like the
True.
cabana is
Yeah.
nice, but I'm not going to go over to what's called Roth Tower and be in this like basically this little hotel suite that you kind of just look out at the game. Like to me, that's not what I'm going there for. I might as well stay home in my comfortable setup that I've worked on getting right and everything. So I don't know where the line is. Some people prefer that, I guess, and I know that's for some people I think it's a status thing that I have the best seats in this place. But I think the cabana is the farthest I go because it's still once you're in your seat, you're just in a regular seat. It's just the things around you are a little better. But I get why it's cool to do one of those suites or whatever. But like to me, you're just not in the game atmosphere, which is what you drive all the way out there to be at, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. To me, the best seat in the house is middle of the court or middle of the field, halfway up. Not too close, not where you can't really get a good angle at certain spots, and not too, of course, far high. That's obvious. So
Sure.
somewhere in that area, just perfect. You're getting the right amount of atmosphere and the right angle and everything else.
Someone that might have to decide where he's going to sit for his next game because he won't be on the sideline anymore. Going back to 2 episodes ago, we talked about the struggles of one Scott Frost. Those struggles have been a little too much to bear, and he has since been removed from his head coaching duties at Nebraska after what is otherwise, can't be described any other way as an embarrassing loss to Georgia Southern at home, giving up over 600 yards of offense, and the Eagles stun the Huskers before he's relieved of his duties. And the story that's been out there is if they would have waited at this point 2 more weeks, but at the time 3 more weeks to fire Scott Frost, they would have saved $7 million because his buyout went from 15 million to like 7.5 or something like that. So my question to you is, how bad do you have to be that you got to get fired now, even if getting fired 3 weeks from now saves you $7 million?
Well, to be fair, at least Nebraska had the decency to wait until he left the field, unlike Arizona State with Herm Edwards. So
That
at
was
least
crazy,
they had,
wasn't it?
isn't
I've
that
never seen
crazy?
anything like that.
Right. And then all of a sudden now we've never seen coaches get fired like 2 or 3 weeks into the year. USC did it a few years ago, and obviously Arizona State and Nebraska. It's like, we know you're struggling, but for some weird reason, we need to see if you win your first 2 games of the next year. And if you go 0-2, we're done with you. Not the fact that you were 7-31 going into this year for Scott Frost. No, we need to see 2 or 3 more games. The Georgia Southern loss, there was like 10 other ones just like it over the course of his career in Nebraska. So it really is an intriguing decision at the time, considering how much money was on the line. I mean, I thought, just as, many college football fans thought, they were going to wait until either that buyout period or towards the end of the year. Like, what is there to gain by firing a guy now? And apparently there's enough for them to actually do it.
I mean, a lot of people thought like, okay, give him the Oklahoma game because they gave them some fits last year. So they ended up getting blown out without Scott Frost there. So clearly that didn't make a difference. So they were 1-2 this year when he got fired. They beat North Dakota, not North Dakota State, but regular North Dakota. They lost the game in Ireland, which we talked about in depth last time. So I don't think it's that he was 1-2. It's how they went 1-2. If they're 1-2 as they win that game in Ireland, and then they, if they don't play North Dakota and they play another regular opponent, and then they lose on a last second field goal to Georgia Southern, maybe they stomach it long enough for that buyout to go down. And Georgia Southern, let's not forget, this is the same team that 3 or 4 years ago beat Florida in Florida without completing a pass. So Georgia Southern, they got a little of that App State in them. They know how to pull up an upset every once in a while. But I just think you can't come back from how that loss happened. And I'm pretty sure, and I should have looked up his name again, the coach for Georgia Southern is the coach that USC fired after those 2 games that you were talking about. So that's a guy that he wasn't going to be intimidated going into that environment. The quarterback for that team, I forget where he transferred from, but he was like a 6th-year player using that COVID year. He's seen everything. So it was the perfect storm really for them to lose that game. But, and I've had, people have talked to me about it. And I mentioned last time, I had a professor at Daytona State that told me how great Scott Frost was going to be when he had first left. And I've had a I told you so email written in my drafts for a couple years now that I still need to send out to that particular professor. So people have asked me my opinion on it, and it's this. It's never fun watching somebody lose their job. Was there a slight bit of like validation that, yes, he wasn't just going to go anywhere and replicate what he did at UCF? Because what he did at UCF was special. It's not something that happens very often. Cincinnati still hasn't done it. Boise State is probably the closest to doing something like that prior to us. And it's just one of those. We were actually, I went to my first hockey game, actually. I went to a UCF hockey game last week with my buddy Luke, and we were driving back, and his dad was with us, and he asked me, and I said, in a way, though, I do feel bad for him because he was kind of manipulated into going there. I think that was always his dream job, but he didn't want to go there right after 2017. I think if he had his way, it's like, hire one more guy. If that guy doesn't work out, by then I'll have built up a 5-year thing here at UCF, and then maybe I'll go. Like if he could have
that way, for sure?
Not 100%. I just think that if they didn't fire, and I forget that guy's name too, right before that, like he would have felt a little bit better leaving the way he did if it was like 2-3 years later down the line. I just feel they pulled the hometown card, pulled at his heartstrings. And that's the thing about Nebraska now. If you're not from Nebraska, if you don't have ties to that program, what is attractive about that job to you? You see everyone always makes up these lists. People are saying Urban Meyer's going to go coach them now, right? What about Nebraska is really enticing? And I feel like he was manipulated a little bit to go there when he went there. And I just think it's hard to get the way he runs his offense. You need Florida speed. It's really hard to get a kid from Florida to not go to FSU, Miami, UCF, FAU, and go to Lincoln, Nebraska. I just think that's difficult in 2022. And, it's not the 80s anymore. Those championships are looking mighty dusty. There's a lot of programs that have that situation. And, I felt validated in what I've always said that, what he did here couldn't just be replicated any old place. So that part was nice. But overall, yes, I do feel bad because I think he got the raw end of the deal. They've released a few other coaches and a former UCF player that was like a graduate assistant staff. He's now the interim special teams coordinator, which sounds like a good deal. But it's like, if that team's terrible, I would hate for that to go on his coaching resume and make it hard for him to get a job in the future. So, it's just one of those, this program is like an anchor to anybody near it right now. And maybe they'll eventually figure it out. But if not Scott Frost, and it wasn't, and, there was other stories how all these crazy losses, he always found a reason to kind of not to blame other people and not himself. So he wasn't perfect in all this, obviously. So, again, other than being validated, I wasn't happy to see it, but it's something that we've kind of expected for a while.
Yeah. Well, all of us here on the show appreciate you adding the context to that conversation. But the other context is that this is a guy that chose a program that's tailor-made to win in a great location, and he goes to a program that's fledgling in a higher division. It feels like he could turn something like that around. The audacity, all right? And, I understand that it's difficult to, stay at a program when there's just so much more money to go to a new program, I would assume. and the opportunity to return home. But look, this was just a guy that felt I could conquer the world, and he got shown that it's a little harder to win at the higher levels, even if you're at a power program in a great location versus in the middle of the Midwest, where it's going to be almost impossible to bring in 4 and 5-star guys. So it was a crazy wake-up call for a lot of guys thinking I can just go to Nebraska or Kansas or any of those Midwest schools that don't have any real talent there to the comparison of the blue bloods out there. So it's a little difficult than it appears.
And there is a little bit, to play devil's advocate, I do think there's a little bit of like, why wouldn't he think that he could do that? Like, did you see what I just did over here? Like, there's a little bit of that. Like, let's say you get a gig, right, and you absolutely crush it, and then somebody calls to get you a significantly bigger gig. In that moment, you're like, yeah, you see what I just did over here? There's no reason that couldn't work. So there's a little bit of that in there. And of course, and I mentioned this, I think last year when we talked about it, was after he lost the week 0 game last year. And back when he was still trying to keep everything hush hush, he said that, like, if I leave, Orlando's my home right now, and Nebraska's always been my home. If I leave Orlando to go back to Lincoln and it doesn't work out, then I don't have a home. And that's kind of where he's at right now. I'm not saying he can't show his face in Lincoln, but there is going to be some people like that. And he damn sure can't show his face down here anymore, even though he still owns a house down here, ironically enough. So it's crazy. I guess the only place to go next is, does he take another, San Diego State level job, a Mountain West job, perhaps? Does he try to become a quarterback coach or an offensive coordinator at a P5 or something else like that? I think he one of those candidates for the assistant coach on a Nick Saban staff where you don't really do much. It's just like fired coaches anonymous, and you're just around all these people. They kind of shine you up and they push you back out in the world. And then, someone offers you another job, like we've seen with Bill O'Brien and some of these other guys. So I don't think we're going to hear from Scott Frost till, I think he will go all even next season, potentially, though we don't really hear from him. Maybe late in the year, you start hearing rumbles about him. But I think 2024 maybe is when we're going to see him take another position. I think he has a lot to reset. People like to make fun of it. The dude looks like he's aged 20 years in the 4 years he's been at Nebraska.
This
so
is
I think
true.
there's a mental reset. I don't want to get into this part, but family issues has also been rumored out there, similar to the Tom Brady ones. I'll just leave it at that.
Yep.
So I think it's going to be a mind and body reset for Scott Frost, where we hear from him again.
Oh yeah. I mean, you've been around plenty of coaches, and me too. It's like, you can see, like, when they are in the middle of a tough losing season, you can see the losses on their face.
Right.
So it really is incredible. And it's safe to say, at least this year, but you're right, probably one more year. And I don't know about 10, 15 years ago, but now that whole Nick Saban experiment where you're a coordinator's assistant and, you're up in the booth and you learn a thing or two, that's, how Kirby gets to where he's at, where the coach at Texas is, where he's at right now. I'm drawing a blank on his name, but there's a lot of Nick Saban disciples in college now that couldn't beat him, and now they're starting to chip away at him, grab some recruits. They're starting to look like Nick Saban Juniors out there. So that could be a path, like you said, but anything wouldn't be anywhere as good as taking a year off to just reset.
The other option too, I'll throw out there, Scott Frost was a offensive assistant, offensive coordinator for Chip Kelly at Oregon. That was his credentials when UCF hired him. So if Chip Kelly is still at UCLA next year, don't be shocked if he's, hanging out around there too. I could see that, because he is a Chip Kelly guy already. So maybe that is a situation that he could find, because Chip could use some help. He's not running all guns ablazes over there. So maybe that would work out. Maybe they could try to replicate what they did at Oregon if they can reunite.
Yeah, and since we're playing and having fun, maybe he could then go to the NFL and be a Super Bowl coach there. I'm telling you, I wouldn't do Chip Kelly's route. That guy's going to get let go any day now. So, or at least it appears that way. We'll see how it works out. But I'd probably jump a different ship if I was Scott Frost.
I could see them keeping him into their Big Ten transition, just because Chip Kelly has been to the NFL, and that seems like a good stopgap guy to make that transition with. I have all the reasons in the world to not like Chip Kelly, but I always considered, like, all the stuff with the Eagles is because he was basically the coach and the GM. And I always equated that to, just because you're a really good cook doesn't mean you should run the restaurant. You should just be like the head chef. So that's how I always looked at Chip Kelly, as someone who should be the head chef and not, running the restaurant. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, interesting to see what'll happen with Scott Frost. We mentioned they lost to Georgia Southern. Normally that would be like the big upset of the week. But that was maybe 3 or 4th down, because we had Marshall upset Notre Dame. We had, what was the other one?
App State.
App State, sorry, yeah, and Texas A&M. So like Sunbelt had itself quite the weekend.
Absolutely.
And I don't know. My theory is, all these transfer portal stuff you're getting, I think the basement teams are now better, and then everything follows suit. So you're still going to see those 70 to 14 games or whatever. But I do think like some of the quarterbacks for all these teams are 5th, 6th year seniors that maybe they didn't play a lot at Power Fives, but they're not walking into these places intimidated because they've already been there, maybe on the bench, but they've been there. Which one do you consider between Marshall and App State? What do you think was the bigger upset?
That's a good question. I didn't know that was where you're headed, but I'd say probably App State. The crazy last play, the Hail Mary that got tipped for a touchdown, that was pretty awesome. App State appears to be one of those programs that's going to be vying for, where UCF is, and Cincinnati and San Diego State is one of those great non-P5 teams. But just to your initial point, one thing I did want to address too is one thing that's becoming very fascinating about college football, and why we might be able to see more upsets now than we have before. Not that college football isn't always upset galore. Right. Is that transfer portal is creating a new reality for a lot of non-5 and 4-star recruits. The 5 stars and the 4 stars are going to Bama and LSU, but the 3 stars are now no longer getting those spots at those power programs. Instead, they're going to the lesser programs, and after 2 or 3 years, then Bama or LSU will take them in as a transfer. That's kind of the new strategy. And I'm seeing it in high school. There's less and less guys getting recruited that aren't 5 and 4 stars, because these colleges feel now that, there's NIL and there's transfers, I'd like to see how you play at a lesser school, and then we'll snag you. Yeah. So I think now we're going to see more guys transfer, and we're going to see more guys that these low colleges know are good, take them in, that Bama and LSU would have taken in anyways. But now, those great kids are going to smaller schools, and that's, in my opinion, what's going to create more upsets around college football in the near future.
I think it trickles down even more. Like, as someone who attends Stetson games, like those 3-star kids that used to get like the last couple scholarships at these middle schools are now playing at the FCS level. So I think the basement is being propped up more than anything. So I do think that's interesting to see. I agree about like Marshall. I've always been shocked that Marshall hasn't gradually grown like the UCF model, because of how big of the boosters and how long, they've been around. The App State transition, because they were an FCS team like 4 or 5 years ago, and their transition has been flawless. They've won bowl, they came in, they woke up in the FBS and won bowl games. Like, a lot of that was Darrington Evans, star running back, just destroyed the Sun Belt in the 4 years he was there. But they've had no issues adapting. And we look like a team like James Madison that's playing FBS for the first time. They're looking at App State as like, okay, this is who you follow to do this. And Sam Houston State and some of the other places that are becoming FBS programs here in the next few years, they're going to look at App State as like the model program on how you make this transition.
Yeah, really, really incredible. And you told me a couple of weeks or months ago, watch We Are Marshall. And after you were picking up your jaw, how in the world have you not seen that movie?
It's a great movie, man.
To think about where they came from to where they are now is absolutely incredible. And in considering just that alone, you've got to be impressed. But I'm also with you. Yeah, when you see App State and you see James Madison, and inevitably when you see North Dakota State go from FCS to FBS and start winning these big games at FBS level, you think anybody can do it. That is incredibly difficult to do because of just how big of a financial disadvantage you have. But it's amazing just in general to step up in competition and be ready to play.
So you mentioned that you finally watched We Are Marshall. The bigger question is, did you ever watch Luke and I's review of We Are Marshall here on the channel?
I did. I did.
Awesome.
You guys were pretty fast. In fact, I went the other way around. I saw your the first half of it first. And I was like, you know what? Let me go ahead and watch it, because I had to get the expert review first.
There you go. That's what I like to hear. So to me, as we wrap up the first half of the show here, the most exciting, pleasant thing I've seen to start this year so far, Florida State being 3-0, and even the most, jolly fan about all this, probably didn't see that coming. They had the opening game in week 0, and they kind of performed the way you expected. They had the thriller against LSU where they blocked the extra point for the win in the Superdome. So it's basically a mega LSU home game. And then they come back and they beat Louisville, who has a dynamite quarterback. And I'm not saying they're running the table or that FSU is back necessarily, but like this is finally all of Mike Norvell's stuff coming together. And I think it's really cool to see. They're one of those programs that I'm not saying they got to be the Alabama level, but when Florida State is at least decent, that's something that's better for the game.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised. Florida State was this team that, with Jimbo and everything, that I expected at some point to make like an LSU leap where they would, for a year or two just catch fire. I mean, they have the great location and the opportunity to do this. And who knows if this is the year, but it is shocking to me that it's taken this long for them to finally start the way that they have. First time ever they've won a game on a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
How crazy is that, right?
Weird stat.
And, I think a lot of it comes down to like Mike Norvell's first year coming in there was a COVID year. So it was weirder than even normal for that. And they had to deal with all this, but he's had great recruiting classes for the 3 years he's been there. So I think it's finally starting to pay dividends. And again, it's great to see even as a UCF fan, man, like Florida State is a great place with great fans. And I'm glad they're digging themselves out of the basement. There's no reason Florida State shouldn't be bowl eligible every single year. So the past 2-3 years that they've missed it has been really strange. So I'm glad to see that they're digging out of it for sure.
Yeah, all of a sudden Miami FSU's rivalry, it's always good, but it's rarely ranked over the last couple decades. Right. Now I think is the time when things change there. And as a UCF fan yourself, Phil, that might be a little tough to watch considering those are the guys that you want on your team.
Right, definitely. And I mean, we're been jockeying for recruits with them for the past few years, and I know plenty of Florida State fans, and I'm all for them. I'd rather them get them than Miami or Florida, for example. But even last year, the Florida State-Miami game, it felt like one of those rivalries of old. Florida State won at the last second. Like, that's the kind of stuff you want to see. Like, if you're going to watch the game on TV, you might as well be with good teams and, like, be entertaining to watch at least.
Really just an incredible, so many teams out there where I would struggle to fall asleep at night knowing that there's a recruit that might be talking to a rival coach. There's so many great programs out there in the state of Florida that I would be shocked if all those coaches aren't making phone calls as we speak.
Yeah, they're all making phone calls to the same 100 kids. It's just a matter of how does the pie get divvied up, I feel.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the first 2 weeks of the NFL season. So stick around. All right, guys, welcome back from college to pro. We're now going to talk 2 weeks into the NFL season. I always purposely don't make an episode after the first week of the NFL because I'm not into the overreaction thing. Some people have a lot of fun with the overreaction, and that's cool. But I like to at least get 2 weeks in because, wise man once said, after week 1, you're never as good as you think you are, and you're never as bad as you think you are either. So I think 2 weeks is where you should really start looking. When we've seen teams already have the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, we're starting to see the teams that are being consistent and whatnot. But I want to start. We'll start, Nick, with your team. Where I want to kind of start every time. We'll do a little Chargers, a little Eagles, and then we'll break in everything else. How is Justin Herbert? And this might also be a fantasy question. I just want to throw this out there. Is he playing next week? What is the status on Justin Herbert? Do you know?
Day to day with those bruised ribs, I would guess that he does suit up week 3, but not entirely positive. And shame on me for forgetting for a moment their opponent. I believe it's Jacksonville this week. I should know this.
I think you're right because I did our picks already. Pretty sure it's Jacksonville. Yeah,
is Jacksonville. Shoot, I forgot last week's picks. But the point is, it's day to day for him. We're dealing with J.C. Jackson, who's day to day. He's the corner, and then Keenan Allen's out. So it's rough going early in the year, but this is what the NFL is all about.
It's funny. So I caught the end of that game, and my wife was actually watching it with me. She'll watch like the end of games because it's something always exciting happens. She doesn't care about the whole thing. But when that injury happened, I correctly said, "Oh no, that's easily broken or bruised ribs. Hopefully they're just bruised." And then Chase Daniels runs out there. He takes his one play and runs back out. And she's joking. He's like, oh, poor Daniels. He only got to play for one play. Then I had to explain to her how he's like the highest paid backup quarterback in the history of the league. So you shouldn't feel sorry for him.
Absolutely. And, what a kid this guy is. I mean, he was so injured that he couldn't run for an easy first down. It would take too much muscle out of him. And that's exactly what I expected from this guy. He's the type of dude that you'd love to have on your team. Yep. And we'll get to another quarterback who's like that in just a second, a guy who will literally maximize his potential to win football games for his team. And he's just a team first guy. Not that there's other quarterbacks who aren't. There's just Herbert, and the guy that you got is as good of leaders as there are in the NFL.
Absolutely. So you've kind of had a little up and a little down so far to start the year. Win week 1, lose week 2. How are you feeling 2 weeks? Assuming Herbert is 90% this week, back to normal next week, like assuming it's not a looming thing. How are you feeling about the Chargers so far this year?
Very good. It was a good loss they had to Kansas City. I don't want to get carried away because they barely beat the Raiders, who coughed up that huge lead against Arizona last week. But this is a team that I think could win 11 or 12 games. Like, I think if they can get guys back and healthy, that is right up their alley. And being right there at the very end in the AFC West. And just very quickly here, they had 4 interceptions. And I know you noticed this too, Phil. 4 interceptions either got overruled or wiped out because of penalty. Yeah. If just one of those picks was caught or was ruled fair, then it's a completely different football game. Not to mention the Chargers were a yard away from a touchdown lead, a pick 6, and all of a sudden they're down by 7. So it's amazing how 1 or 2 plays make the difference in games like this. But I'd rather lose a heartbreaker now than lose a heartbreaker in week 18 or in the playoffs. So I'll take this.
That pick 6 was huge, like you said, and I don't put that one on Herbert. I forget the name of the receiver. You'll probably know.
Gerald Everett.
I don't know if he got injured or was just gassed and he couldn't get out of the game, and he kind of like half-assed a route, and that's why that pick happened. So like maybe, I mean, the only thing I could say about Herbert is if you know this guy's gassed, to maybe not try to look his way. That would be the only thing I would say, but that was definitely more on the receiver than on him. And if you didn't watch this game and you just looked at Mahomes' stats, you're like, oh, typical Patrick Mahomes day. Like you said, no, he was like an inch away from having a 4-pick game, or a Kirk Cousins, as I like to call it.
Yeah. Well, the sun already set. So absolutely, it could have been one of those. But still, those are 2 of the top 3 or 4 teams in the AFC. I got Chiefs, Chargers, Bills, and there might be a team I'm forgetting about. Maybe the team that I ruled off, Miami, could be that 4th team. So there's not many great teams in the AFC. Or I mean, there's a lot of really good teams, but I think there are only a couple great ones. Right. And I'd say those 2 teams who played on Thursday to debut Al Michaels and Kirk Herbstreit on Thursday night on Amazon, I think that was a potential AFC championship preview. It very easily could be.
What do you think, real quick? What do you think of Kurt on there? And is Al Michaels still calling games as lazy as I think he is? Because I've never forgiven him for the Super Bowl, so I'm like biased about it. What'd you think about? Like, I think Kirk did great for his first game. It's still weird hearing him talk about professional players. Like, it just is. It'll take a while for that to learn. Absolutely. But I think overall it was fine. I think it did no issues. I know people complained about the Amazon Prime part of it. Like, I clicked it on and it was fine the entire game. So I don't know what people are talking about. Get better Wi-Fi, I guess.
To be fair, I mean, I'm just basing on last year's evaluation of Al Michaels. I still thought he was very good, but like you said, I think his fastball is gone from 4 or 5 years ago. And I wasn't really paying close attention to Al Michaels talking.
I mostly mean on like the touchdowns. Like his touchdown calls are never as high energy as, I mean, granted, if a guy runs it in untouched from 3 yards out, sure. But like there were some great touchdowns in that game, and his energy didn't seem to match it.
Yeah, 2010 Al Michaels, or even Al Michaels with John Madden. That was apex Al Michaels. But I'll take 85% Al Michaels over a lot of guys any day.
True. Very true.
So I still thought he was solid. And, with Kirk Herbstreit, the fact that he stayed out of his way and the fact that he didn't mention too many guys used to be all Americans or 5 stars. I think that's a good, not that we don't need to know that,
Yeah.
but we don't need to know that. So
I
go ahead.
enjoy the former Michigan State Spartan makes a catch. I enjoy all that stuff. So I hope he pulls a little bit of that in, but you can tell, and maybe this is just because of the the industry that we work in, he laid out a lot. He will in the future talk a lot more, but he clearly laid out a lot, gave out all the room, probably too much room. But being your first game, that's totally expected.
Yeah, like maybe he saw the Chris Collinsworth vitriol on social media and said, I don't want to get that way right away.
Yeah.
So let me go dip my toe in the water and see what people think. And I didn't judge social media too much. I didn't see too much Herb Street conversation, but if there's no conversation, it's probably a good thing. So I think he did solid.
I didn't see a lot of. I saw more negative about the stream on Amazon itself, which again I had no problem with. So get better Wi-Fi.
And Sunday Ticket. Don't forget about that.
Oh yeah, that's a thing still, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, 2 weeks in a row, guys are just like unable to watch NFL games. It's like trying to watch NBA on a random Tuesday. It's like just
good luck.
You name the games that aren't blacked out.
Yeah, exactly. That's a whole conversation for another day about NBA and just regional sports in general. To wrap up the Chargers like first 2 games, I mentioned I was a broken record last week. That division is so damn good that a team that's probably pretty solid is going to still end up in 4th place. And the Raiders look like that team already. They seem outmatched. The Cardinals game,
I don't maybe.
Don't think so?
I don't know. What do you think about
Denver too, which was actually going to be, once we talk about the Eagles, that was going to be my next thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. I guess we'll save it for that.
Yeah, just a quick minute. But I like the Raiders, especially losing to the Cardinals. If you remember, I had the Cardinals and the Titans were the teams I was out on. I'm very right about the Tennessee thing. And I was like an 18-yard scramble play about being right about the Cardinals, which, by the way, how do you scramble for 18 yards and not get one holding call? There's runs up the gut that last 2 seconds that have holding calls. You mean tell me nobody held on that play at all? A little suspect to me.
Yeah, not only that, just the whole, end of that game, it did feel like those officials live in Glendale because, it did feel like every 4th down, it was like the Cardinals would just figure out some sort of a way. I'm with you. I mean, the Raiders look like the better team for sure.
Yeah. I mentioned last time that, the Cardinals were like average, and then they won that Hail Mary game against Buffalo. That's what everybody hung their hat on. The Cardinals might be average the rest of the year, but people will think they're better because of this game. So we'll see what happens with them moving forward. But to talk about the Eagles real quick, we had our game. That's a little more fresh in my mind because it was just 2 days ago now. Hank was in our group chat and he asked me, because I'm not a Jalen hater, but I'm not a Jalen backer either. I'm very down the middle with him. And Hank asked me, shout out Hank if you're listening, what did I think of the game? And I had no problem saying, I think this is the best Jalen Hurts game I've ever seen. I watched him convert a 3rd and 13 with his arm. I didn't know that he could do that, and he did. And the defense played great. Darius Slay looked like Defensive Player of the Year if he keeps that going. It's on Monday night, so everything's magnified, definitely. The stars were out. I don't know if you guys saw, Bradley Cooper was there. James Harden was there. Darius Slay gave him a ball or whatever. Everybody was there but Miles Teller. He must have been shooting some movie or whatever. But it just felt for some reason, it felt like Hollywood for a minute just because everybody was there. So Jalen played great. He had his 2 rushing touchdowns. He just looked poised in the pocket and everything. So if we get more of this, then perfect. This is the best game I've seen him play. The Detroit game even was more of the same. Don't lose the game, do just enough to win the game. And that was a nail biter against a Detroit team that I think is better than they've been in years past, but still, haven't taken that leap yet. So there's nowhere to go but down when you play this good. So there's obviously going to be a small dip, but I liked everything that I saw in that game. I felt bad that he got an interception. He threw a pass to Gainwell. It bounced off his hands, got intercepted because he played well enough to have a clean sheet. That interception, much like the Justin Herbert one, was not on him. So, that's one of the best Eagles get. It was a blowout, right? And I'm, watching it out in the living room. And my wife's like, why is this even fun? Because, you guys are winning by so much. This doesn't happen very often. Let me have this. I'm going to watch this till 000. That's how I felt. So, again, nowhere to go but down because of how good they played. And there was a few, the score wasn't quite the blowout that it looked like and I was playing against somebody in fantasy that had Kirk Cousins. I won by 0.2 points because Kirk threw 3 picks. 0.2 points. He would throw a slant, pick up a first down, he'd go up a point. I'd be like, damn. And then he'd throw a pick and he'd lose 3 points, and then I'd be in the lead again. That happened 3 different times in the game. So I had a lot of skin in that game too. But I'd like your opinion from a more neutral side. But again, this is the best most complete Eagles game I've seen in like 2.5 years, I'd say.
I'm a little bit higher on Jalen Hurts than you are, but I'm not crazy with it. But I would say today I would take Hurts by a hair over Dak and the rest of the quarterbacks in the NFC East. I would assume you might be on the other end. Maybe you might like him slightly more.
Compared to Dak, I think I'd take Jalen just because a little younger, a little healthier. It's very close. Like if you pick one over the other, like you're not really putting down the other guy. In my view of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So
we've seen more of Dak too. We've seen more good and more bad of Dak. So there's just more to go off of with Dak.
There's a moment right now in the NFL where it seems like we've got a lot of different types of quarterbacks, but very similar stories. I feel Kyler, Lamar, Jalen Hurts, guys like that, scramblers who are early in their career can be very, very valuable for a team, but you don't quite feel ready to give them a max 4 or 5 year deal. Like they're just not quite that level. And It's amazing. At some point very soon, all these guys are going to be up. Lamar feels like he should have gotten paid yesterday, but a lot of these guys, it's like, how are these teams going to, going to decide? And where is that going to put their franchise in a couple of years? So while I love Jalen Hurts, I'm with you. It sucks because he doesn't suck. He's good. Yeah. So he's worth money and he's worth keeping on your team, but he's not worth a max deal. So what do you do with this type of guy? And will he be willing to take a discount or take, a few less years in order to be team friendly and keep the team winning games?
I mean, the way he's hyped up is he will have that superstar mentality, even if he's not quite a superstar. But a lot of those guys you just mentioned, Tua, Jalen, Lamar to a lesser extent, because he's just a playmaker. These guys are as good as the weapons you put around them. AJ Brown with Jalen and not AJ Brown with Jalen, big difference, right? We've seen it in 2 games. So if he's one of those guys, maybe you can go to him and be like, hey, like you like all these great, like high paid offensive weapons around you. You got to give us a little back to keep them around too. And you know what? I've heard everything about Jalen being a great teammate, great in the locker room. You mentioned, a guy you want to play with, you want in your locker room. If that's all true, he should explain that. He should understand that, and we'll see where that goes. Obviously, it's still a few years down the road for him. So, like, this is a big year coming up on what happens with that, I think.
Yeah, and actually one other part of that argument I meant to add is that all those players that I mentioned have a scrambling component to their game where you're wondering how long are you going to be able to have that aspect, and you're hoping that he develops more of a passing game. And it appears that Hurts has improved in that area from last year, but is that going to continue to improve to the level of maybe a scrambling going down in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I remember exactly. I remember a game against Denver before this was his best game in general, I felt. And then he had a throw against Washington that at the time I thought was his best throw of his career. Both of those have been updated from this game, in my opinion here. We mentioned, I talked a little bit about the Raiders, and it really popped in my head who might be the dog in that division. The let Russ cook theory in Denver has not worked out so far. And I expected if Denver was going to be 0-2, I thought they would lose games, 38-35 and 42-38, where Russ does everything. Basically his last 2 years in Seattle, right? Where he does everything right and Denver just comes up short. They've had a little injury issues, like Jerry Jeudy didn't play or played very little in the last game and all that. But they looked bad. They looked unorganized. I don't know how much of this is maybe Nathaniel Hackett just isn't that dude. Anybody that goes by Nathaniel, I don't know that I trust anyway. But I don't know. Do you put it on Russ? Is Hackett just as bad as he's getting killed on Twitter for? Or what do you think?
I'd say he's about as bad as I mean, I don't care how good you are at X's and O's, motivation and character development. You can't be this bad in situational football. You cannot. It takes a day of playing Madden to understand kicking a 64-yard field goal one week and then deciding to forego a 58-yard field goal the next week because it's too far is it like you're not making any sense. And then
Right.
after the game, after the week 2 game, he says, yeah, I'm making big mistakes, like I'm struggling right now and stuff like that. Just point all the arrows at me when clearly I'm already overwhelmed by the arrows currently pointed my way. And the other thing that was frustrating as a Charger guy in the AFC West was hearing for the longest time that this team, I get, is talented, but Super Bowl ready with a quarterback. Why are you
away,
going
definitely. I thought
7?
that. I thought it 100%.
Super Bowl ready. I knew they were good.
Deep playoff run away with a quarterback. I probably would have told you last year.
I just felt like they were a little overhyped about how good they were going to be. But to be fair, I also thought Russ would play better. Late in that game against Houston, on a 3rd down, he's stripping and falling over air. Yeah. So at some point, that has to be nerves and has to be feeling like he has to do everything for the football team. So I think Denver will be in the hunt at some point, but Nathaniel Hackett is worse than I thought, considering you're a coordinator. You've been in these situations consistently with a guy in Aaron Rodgers that probably taught you a thing or two to now looking like, with good players, they are nothing like the team, that I expected. So Denver is one of the few teams where this year they look nothing like I thought they would. They look worse.
Like week 1, if they go for it on 4th and 5 and pass is tipped, guy drops the pass, gets stopped short of the sticks, nobody really says anything about the coach or the game plan. Says, oh, they lost. That's weird. But to have these 2 games back to back that are clearly lost by inexperienced coaching is just this giant magnifying glass. And like you said, Russ hasn't played great either. If they lose 38-35 on the last second field goal and Russ plays great, nobody says anything. But they look like one of the worst teams to start the year, which I never would have thought.
By the way, I think they won the game against Houston. So it's hilarious. That defense is really, really good. So Russ does not even have to be the Pro Bowler that he was. He just has to not trip over air and go 6 for 20 in the first 3 quarters of the game last week. So at some point, he's going to be better. This is ridiculous. But yeah, I'm totally down on this team. I think they may miss the playoffs even with all the hype going into the year.
More embarrassing loss, the Browns to the Jets or the Ravens to the Dolphins?
Ravens to the Dolphins, no question. Baltimore is better than that. This is a team that has Super Bowl aspirations. I consider them, now I got to put Miami in there. As a top 4 team in the AFC. That was a great measuring stick game. And for the Ravens to cough it up with Lamar Jackson playing as good as he did, it wasn't like, their quarterback goes down and they give up 21 unanswered points. So there's an explainable reason. Baltimore just fell asleep at the wheel. Guys were running wide open. How do you leave Tyreek Hill open deep downfield? Nothing cheap, nothing deep when you're up by 3 touchdowns. Very embarrassing loss. Cleveland, you expect this out of them.
The Dolphins thing, obviously living here, I know plenty of Dolphins fans. Shout out to Don, my co-host on the Wrestler Report. Over the moon over the Dolphins comeback, right? You feel good about that, but you do have to remember that you also put yourself in that hole. So, you don't want to do that again, right? And, Tua throws 6 touchdowns, which is fantastic. But I'm not saying it'll never happen again because it could, but that's not going to be the norm. So it's can we go back? Can we win a normal game? This is great. And if the Dolphins play well, you'll point at this game as this is where that momentum started. But it's now you want them to come out next week. I don't know who they play. Come out next week and win 24-13 and just win a good, full, complete game. They do that, you can feel really good about it. If they lose 20-7 next week, it was all for naught. And I'm not saying they will, but how they respond to this next, I think will matter. The Browns Jets thing, like you said, that was just the Browns being the Browns. If Chubb doesn't score, they can run out the clock. You can pull a Brian Westbrook and kneel on the 1-yard line. They can run out the clock or whatever. The first time in 20 years that a team lost up 2 touchdowns or 2 possessions under 2 minutes to go. You could say the Ravens lost to a better team than the Jets, obviously, but the way they lost might be a little more embarrassing. And maybe we're just used to it with Cleveland. We've seen them do stuff like this all the time.
and we're used to that with Joe Flacco too. Right when you count them off,
Yeah.
Joe Flacco, Ryan Fitzpatrick, two of the most amazing quarterbacks ever, because when there's no pressure on, they're just incredible. And then all of a sudden you expect them to do something, and that's 2013 Baltimore, right after they win the Super Bowl. It's like, what in the world? Who is this guy? So Joe Flacco, man, he's still alive and well.
Yeah. Not much to say here, but like I just think we should mention them on the show, like because I think you were saying they were a little less than I thought at the time, but like the Bills looked every bit as good as advertised through these first 2 weeks. There's not much more to say.
Even better than advertised.
Right,
I
yeah.
mean, they're top 5 in basically every statistical category this year.
Mm.
And their point differential of plus 55 is going to look great on the playoff committee. Mm-hmm. But even without the playoff committee, 2-0 against the opponents they played, reigning Super Bowl champion LA Rams, reigning number 1 seed in the AFC Tennessee. Who knows if they get anywhere close to that this year, but the pedigrees are there, and they just put a whooping on both of them. So Buffalo is a team that I felt would be in the Super Bowl conversation. Today, I think they're Super Bowl favorites.
Yeah, they keep that resume up. The SEC might come calling. You know, they're expanding. I don't know if you heard.
Kevin Durant might join them too. Don't forget about that.
Good comeback. You know, it's funny with the Eagles and Bills both playing on the same night. It's Monday night. It's magnified. There's already like Eagles versus Bills talk in a Super Bowl just because everyone's got to overreact to everything.
Oh yeah.
And I couldn't imagine. I don't know if there's a structure on earth that could hold Eagles and Bills fans with a Super Bowl on the line. That would be something. You'd have to reinforce whatever. I don't know where this is. It in LA this year? The Super Bowl?
No, it's in Glendale, Arizona.
Well, okay, well they better reinforce that bad boy if we get closer to it and we see it's this, because like, you know, Eagles fans are diehard, but if there's one set of fans that even Eagles fans can tip their cap to, it's Bills fans. Like Eagles fans are crazy. We're not jumping through tables and shit. So not saying I wouldn't, but we haven't.
I'm saying make sure to buy your tables now, folks, in the Southern Arizona area, because I'd say even both fan bases might just sell them out, you know, for a Super Bowl like that. That would be pretty incredible.
So you mentioned one, you know, the Super Bowl champions, you know, little interesting start to the year, at least 1-1. But the AFC reigning champions, Super Bowl hangover seems a bit real for the Bengals. I mean, that first game had the issue with a long snapper. You never know how important a long snapper is until you don't have one. Mitchell Wilcox from South Florida had to step in there. Couldn't get it done. Dude's from a small school. You know, you just can't do it. But absolutely. So they lose that game. And that one you can at least look at like, oh, snapper issues. You know, they had like 2 chances to win that game against Pittsburgh, right? So, but to lose to Dallas with Cooper Rush, like that shouldn't happen. I understand Dallas is talented, but like they looked so bad against the Bucs. And then with a backup quarterback, do what they want against you. Obviously, they have a great defense. Micah Parsons might be like defensive player of the year caliber dude. Dallas has a great defense, no doubt about that. But 0-2 for Cincinnati. Luckily, that division's a little winnable because like the Ravens just lost, and Pittsburgh, like I'll never take Pittsburgh serious regardless of their record because they went 11-0 2 years ago and then just like nosedive. So like they might steal the division, but it's just kind of a wasted space at that point. But do you think the Bengals have enough to regroup here at starting 0-2?
To me, I felt last year they were kind of like the way they started this year. They're just a good team. Yeah. They're not a Super Bowl level team. And I think it's starting to show itself this year where they can't have Joe Burrow taking sacks like that. Like they need him to play like Joe Cool, Joe Namath. Otherwise, they're just an average football team. And that's the way they look the first 2 weeks of the year. And it is as embarrassing as it is that they lost to Cooper Rush. They had no business being up by 20 in that game, in my opinion, because they still have holes. But to me, Joe Burrow struggling, the offensive line, which is filled with Pro Bowlers now that they adjusted in the off year, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, it is crazy to see them look this bad the first couple weeks.
Yeah, it's really head scratching. Like I said, the first game, you could at least look at it, what went wrong. The second game, you know, I didn't get to see a lot of it. I was watching Red Zone at the time, and the game didn't come up all that much. But like you assumed they could handle this, especially as bad as Dallas looked week 1. And they're not going away. Like as an Eagles fan, like that's going to be the race all year, as it has been for the past several years. So we'll see what happens there. But like, I don't know what, like you said, they have the Pro Bowl offensive line now, right? And was their big glaring issue last year. and they fixed it supposedly, and then now they're just not getting it done. So
they're even worse now. Apparently, they're
yeah.
giving up more sacks than last year. And one thing we tried to prepare for this in our post Super Bowl show, or no, pre Super Bowl show. Okay, if based on who loses, who's going to be the team that has a major hangover next year? And we were all like, look, the Rams, they're older. Guys are talking about retirement. If anybody's going to fall off this year, it'll be the LA Rams. In our wildest dreams, we think Cincinnati, super young team, super young coach, would fall off like this if they lost. And that's exactly what happened. But that the Super Bowl hangover is a real deal. Think about how many losers came back, minus the Patriots, which is the biggest anomaly in sports history. I'm just thinking Atlanta after coughing up 28-3, Carolina after MVP year with Cam Newton. You go down the list, Rams with Jared Goff. Everybody after the Super Bowl faces a fallout, except for like one or two exceptions. And Cincinnati is just right in that same picture.
Usually like Pittsburgh or something, they, when they lost to Green Bay, they were kind of right in there. But yeah, Super Bowl hangover is a real thing, and it's really hard to overcome that. Couple quick hits here before we get out of here. The Bucs Saints fight that happened. Do you think it merits a game suspension for Mike Evans, because he is
repeat offender?
He is a repeat offender, but he is like challenging it, or lack of a better word. You think it's worth it? Like, I think it's important that we do note that at the center of all this, Brady kind of started this. It's kind of like the thing with the Dolphins. We're trying to smooth him over there, and the Dolphins got, all these penalties, and Tom Brady's just sitting here like nothing happened to him. But like, where do you fit with the Mike Evans thing? I mean, if it's only one game, I'm not going to complain too much, but like, considering Lattimore didn't get anything, I think you just kind of move on from it, personally.
Man. I mean,
considering he got kicked out of that game, I think that should have been enough.
Absolutely. And it's funny, we dodged the topic on the show. One of these days, we're just going to attack this thing head on. How many transgressions can Tom Brady commit and never get any punishment for it, except for the 4-game suspension the 1 year? That's it. It's incredible, man, that he can instigate whatever he wants and move along with it. And we ruffle some feathers sometimes on the show, but it reminds me a lot. And I like LeBron, but when LeBron got suspended 1 game for elbowing the Detroit Piston guy, and he got suspended 2 games for instigating a fight, I was like, okay. It's the same type of thing where it's like, okay, we're going to penalize the guy who retaliated way more than the guy who created the whole problem. So, but that's how it works.
It's hard to like penalize LeBron with game suspensions, because like if that dude could help it, he just wouldn't show up till the playoffs anyway. It's like getting suspended from school. It's like, cool, I don't got to go to school that day. Like, this is the dude that invented load management. So like, you give him a day off. He's like, I was kind of hoping I had a day off anyway. So it's a little different. Whereas Brady, I can say a lot about him. The dude wants to show up. The dude wants to play football. That's the difference.
Fair point. Okay. Fair enough. We'll hit this topic another day for sure.
Yeah, we will. Also, a little bit of bad news here at the end. Trey Lance out for the season. Didn't look like he was playing great, but regardless, it sucks to see that happen. Weirdly enough, it might be the best thing for the Niners, at least for this year. Really shows like we can't get rid of Jimmy G. Like, we are destined to do this forever with Jimmy G until he retires. That's a solid team now in a very wide open NFC, like we talked about. Sucks for Trey Lance. We'll see where that goes. Not much more news is going to be said on him for the rest of the year. But weirdly, if you're a 49er fan, you're like, that sucks. But like, I feel like I got a better team now.
Yeah, I mean, before the year started and watching him blow a lead against Chicago, given the conditions there. But yeah, you feel horrible for Trey Lance. Not, we can look in the immediate future, and I'm with you. They're better off with Jimmy G, in my opinion. Say what you want about his blunders, they're better off. But you got to feel for a guy that just can't seem to stay healthy and can't seem to stay on the field. 450 pass attempts in a half decade. That's dating back to high school. So he's just never been on the field.
Yeah.
And while we've seen some instances of like Aaron Rodgers not play for 3 years and other instances where quarterbacks can overcome a lack of playing time and be great, man, this is going to be very, very difficult for him. Granted, he's surrounded by great coaches and great players in San Francisco, but you got to feel for this guy. Like, his career is on the line now. He needs to come back soon and play in order for him to have a real chance.
And like that first game against the Bears, like in that monsoon and the field was terrible, like you can't really gauge anything on him. And then like he gets hurt in this game. So like the dude hasn't really played in any capacity to really judge him on like what to do moving forward. So like it's one thing if they fell into Trey Lance, but they gave up the farm for this guy. So it's not like the Niners can say, well, that sucks, let's keep going. You don't have the capital to get anybody. You know, the only guy, and like it almost makes you wonder, like, should they have pushed harder for Brady? Because we all know that's where Brady wanted to go. You know, but I mean, that would have only lasted a few years anyway.
By the way.
What's that?
The answer is yes, by the way. They absolutely should have.
Yeah.
Jimmy G and Trey Lance, 2 injury prone. I wouldn't do it, but you are where you are now.
Yeah. So that, and it's rough because like you mentioned, they're like the NFC equivalent of the Broncos. You almost look at them as a, maybe I could almost say Super Bowl because they were in the NFC Championship, you know, the year before or whatever. So they're a deep playoff team, a quarterback away. So it's almost.
I'd say they are better than the Broncos, though. All right.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah. You know, if you take out the quarterback position, only the most important position in sports.
Yeah, that's all you're missing. Other than that, Miss Lincoln, how was the play? Right? You know, it's only the most important thing.
Exactly. But by the way, before we move on, I just think the Jimmy G playoff struggles. Granted, the numbers don't look great. Way too overblown, in my opinion. This guy, there's too many occasions of this guy delivering an important playoff spots for us to say he's not at least a capable replacement for this guy. I love Jimmy G, man. I think he's a solid quarterback and totally, minus the injury problems, a guy that I'd like on my team.
Yeah, I think he's at this point, you just got to ride it out. You know, next year you re-sign him to a moderate deal and you just kind of ride it out. Like they're kind of made for each other. Like who else? Yeah. Jimmy G was out there for months and I don't think there was as much as a nibble. Like I think the only thing, if Rodgers would have retired and gone host Jeopardy and when all that nonsense was going on, maybe the Packers would have been. But other than that, I can't think of anybody else. So it'll be interesting to see, especially if like, because Jimmy G's seen everything. He's a veteran and all this. Like they come out and win the next 2 games. People like the fans are cheering and the office is going to be pulling their hair out because it's like all this guy does is make us look bad for trying to move on from him. You know,
it's Tim Tebow, but better than Tim Tebow, but same deal with Denver.
Yeah. I mean, he did it for like a 9-game stretch. This guy's done it for like 5 years. That's the difference.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, even Carolina, when they were trying to figure out a quarterback, they said, I'd rather have Baker than have Jimmy G. Crazy stuff.
That's an interesting one too. I mean, maybe it was, I can't imagine Jimmy G has like, oh, I don't want to go there. It's like, you're going where people are offering, I think is what it came down to. So, which ended up being nobody, which is why he's still there. But yeah, that's 2 weeks in the NFL. It's only going to get crazier from here. Want to thank you guys for checking this out. Appreciate Nick coming by, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening.